Professor Nitar,
Yes.
just to let you know that this year is our 20th anniversary.
Oh, my heavens. I did not realize that. Hmm.
Yeah, that what makes actually your presence here, I mean tonight, um, special too for
Hmm.
CRCS.
Oh, my. Yes. So that means that things began in the year 2000.
Right.
Hmm.
Yes.
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 And and
And
I
we have,
believe my
go
first
ahead.
visit, I think I joined you the first time I came to visit. I was doing a kind of evaluation for the Fulbright, I think
That's
it
true.
was. Must
That's
have
true.
been 2000 and what, 2003 or something.
2003.
Yeah. Hmm. Right.
2002, 2003. I
Oh
think two,
my.
2002.
2002.
2000. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yes, yes.
Oh yeah.
And so we
All right.
survived.
Yes, you certainly did. Hmm. I sent you those photographs of some of the students from that time.
We actually
They,
wanted to show it here. We
oh.
I'll show
already,
it later. I'll
okay.
show
Hmm.
it later. Yeah. Okay, since we are going to start, I am going to mute all the participants and only Professor Niter and Mas Anju who I will not mute so that we can begin the event. Um, all right. I'm going to start now. Um, okay. Good evening, everybody. Good evening here from Yogyakarta in Indonesia. It's now 9 p.m. here and 10 p.m. there in the Wisconsin, in the place where Professor Paul Nitter is going to talk. I'm Aziz Anwar. I'm the staff member at the Center for Religious and Cross-Cultural Studies, CRCS, at the Graduate School of Gadjah Mada University. But right now I'm at my home in Bantul, and with me is Dr. Samsul Ma'arif or Mas Anju, who is the director of CRCS. And to all of you who are already in the Zoom meeting, welcome to Wednesday Forum. This is a forum that is held by both CRCS and the Indonesian Consortium for Religious Studies, or ICRS, a doctoral program in religious studies, also located at the Graduate School of Gadjah Mada University. And I'm going to be the host tonight. And our speaker is already present, Professor Paul Nitter, who is the Paul Tillich Emeritus Professor of Theology, World Religions, and Culture at the Union Theological Seminary in New York City. He earned his doctorate in the Protestant University of Marburg in Germany in 1972. So he is really a senior academic and professor of theology. He is also a friend and colleague of the great theologian John Hick. And he was also the author of the book titled Without Buddha, I Could Not Be a Christian. That was published in 2009, and also another book on Jesus and Buddha, published in 2015, I believe. And Professor Nitter is going to reflect on the past researches that he has been doing about how we ground, how we formulate a theology on religions and theology that can be the basis for interreligious dialogue. not only within religion itself, but also in facing the environmental crisis, social justice, and other social issues. And also in the end, Professor Nita is going to reflect on what interreligious or interfaith communities can contribute to cope with the crisis during this pandemic. So this is also this also marks the 20th century, the 20th anniversary of CRCS. CRCS was founded in 2000, and now 2020, it's already 20 years since the founding of CRCS. And Professor Nita was also one of the scholars who helped the founding of CRCS. He taught at CRCS in 2003 to 2006. And I believe there are many CRCS alumni here who were also students of Professor Paul Niter. So without further ado, Professor Niter, you have 40 minutes maximum for presentation, and then the next 40 to 45 minutes for discussion with participants. And for those of you who want to ask or to give comments, you can do it in three ways. You can raise your hands virtual hands, and then I will let you to speak, or you can post your questions in the chat room in the Zoom meeting, or you can write down your questions in the YouTube live streaming comment section. So without further ado, I will give time to Professor Paul Niter to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Niter.
Thank you, Aziz, very much. Well, I can't express how deeply appreciative, how happy I am to be at least virtually back in Indonesia at the CRCS Center, and to be with all of you. I just have such very warm memories of my time there. I think, as you said, I was there. I visited there for the first time, I think 2002. I was part of a Fulbright evaluation program. And then I came back to teach, I think in 2004. And then back again in 2006 for a conference that CRCS had organized. Yes, and I was there during the, was that the year of the earthquake?
Yep, the earthquake.
Yeah, 2006, was that right?
Yeah,
we were there with Farid Essaq and such. We were those are other memories. Anyway, it was just an opportunity to visit your beautiful country and to get to know your beautiful and courteous and warm people. At least most of you. It was just such a delight. But for me, one of the biggest advantages of being with you in Indonesia was that it really affected, it really changed my understanding of Islam, my feeling for Islam, where I came just witnessing your own commitments and your own faith really helped me appreciate the deep spirituality and beauty of Islam. So I am very, very grateful for that. Of course, while I was there, I also saw that Islam is struggling with some of the same problems that I, as a Christian, that we Christians are struggling with. And I tried to address some of those common problems in that article that I sent you of a lecture that I gave at the Al-Azhar University in 2009, where I titled it Sibling Rivalries and Sibling Possibilities. Anyway, that article came out of my experience, much of my experience at CRCS. So as Aziz said, what I'd like to do now, briefly, but I hope clearly, is just to review with you some of the questions, some of the concerns that have animated me in my, when I look back, almost 50 years as a theologian, as a Christian theologian, but as what I like to call myself and others, a dialogical theologian. Some of these issues that were mentioned in the blurb, in the advertisement for our forum. One of the first things, the first issue that I'd like to review with you is what I came to recognize as the need that, speaking as a Christian, that we Christians have, but it's a need that I think all religions have, to work out a theology that will support dialogue, a theology that will make dialogue possible. And this, for me, this started when I was a student. I was a student of theology in Rome, Italy, way back before most of you were born, in 1962 to 1966. And I was in Rome for the Second Vatican Council. That was a council, a meeting of all the bishops of the world, of the Catholic Church, who came together for a renewal of the Catholic Church. And one of the things that they renewed, that they reformed, was the attitude of the Catholic Church towards other religions. And in that council, there was a clear call for dialogue with other religions, that Christians, Catholics now were called to, were actually obligated to engage in dialogue with people from other religions. That was something totally new in the Catholic Church, in the history of the Catholic Church. Well, I took that very seriously as a young student. But then I realized, as I explored this issue, that so much of Christian theology or Christian belief was in tension with or in contradiction to dialogue. So on the one hand, we Christians said, oh, we want to dialogue. We said to Muslims and Buddhists and Hindus and Jews, yes, we want to dialogue with you. But then I realized that our theology, however, contained our beliefs, our Christian beliefs, contained what seemed to me to be obstacles to dialogue. I mean, beliefs that seemed to stand in contradiction to dialogue. And what I'm talking about is the way Christianity has always presented itself either as the only true religion or as the superior religion over all others. So I said to myself, how can you sincerely and honestly tell other people from other religions, I want to talk with you, I want to learn from you, when I believe that God has given me the fullness of truth or the final truth, the normative truth for all other religions? That would be like inviting you to a card game with me, to play cards with me, but I would first deal to myself all of the aces. In other words, I would get all of the superior cards in our card game. How can you have a card game when one side has all the best cards? How can you have a dialogue when one side has the God-given fullness of truth? That was my problem. And it's a problem that is tied in with the way Christians understand Jesus. The way Christians understand Jesus as the one and only Savior for all humankind. But when I was in Jogja at CRCS, I recognized, if I may speak humbly and cautiously, that Muslims have something of the same problem with their insistence of beliefs. And I'm speaking as a Christian. I'm ready to be corrected by you, but it seems to me when Islam says that Muhammad is the seal of the prophets, there are no prophets after Muhammad. I mean, that there is some of the same problems that we Christians have to deal with. So in any case, I have dedicated much of my career as a theologian to explore these questions of superior truth claims, namely claims that each religion makes to be the superior religion over all others. Now, how to deal with this? Because believing that Jesus is the only Savior is something that seems to be integral to Christianity. Can you change that? That's a very complicated theological question. And I realized over the course of many years that that question cannot be resolved theologically. And that brings me to my second point, to my second issue, that namely, to deal with these theological problems of dialogue, one has to approach this question personally. Personally, and that means in dialogue interpersonally. And I've come to realize that before I can take up these questions about how I understand Christianity, I first have to make contact with, I first have to become friends with people from other religions. So that it is on the basis of friendship, primarily, not on the basis primarily of theology, but on the basis of friendship, where people, Muslims and Christians and Jews and Hindus and Buddhists, become friends with each other. And how to do that? And this is my second point, where I realize that one of the best ways, one of the successful ways to build interreligious friendship is through interreligious cooperation, interreligious collaboration to promote the well-being of humanity and of the planet. In other words, it would be a conversation, a meeting of people from different religions who share common concerns about the suffering, the tremendous amount of suffering that so many millions of people on our planet are enduring. All forms of suffering. But I'm talking about unnecessary suffering, where then Christians and Muslims and Buddhists can come together to say, how can we address the problems of suffering, especially the sufferings that are due to injustice? Namely, the sufferings that are due, the sufferings that are caused by what some human beings do to other human beings. This suffering, I think, certainly for Jews and Christians and Muslims, that is something prophetic religions. We are the prophetic religions. For us, that is part of our religious DNA. We address sufferings. As it says in the Jewish Bible, in the prophet Ezekiel, to know God is to do justice. To know God is to do justice. So certainly for the Abrahamic, the prophetic religions, addressing suffering due to injustice is integral to who we are. But it is also true in different ways for Buddhists and Hindus, for the Asian religions. And so my basic suggestion, and it's not just mine, I'm doing this with many other religions, other theologians, Asian theologians especially, namely, let us cooperate together. Let us become friends together as we address the sufferings due to social structures, to economic policies, to the environmental threat that all of us face. And today, the sufferings due to the COVID-19 pandemic. How can we come together and build and address this together? And so I have found through my experience of this kind of religious action for justice that I have made deep, deep friendships with people from other religions. And they have become friends with me. And then I have noticed, I have recognized that when we are friends, I a Christian, you a Muslim, neither of us will talk about, I have a superior religion over yours. My God, I know more about God than you do. Friends don't talk that way. Friends regard each other. Friends care for each other. Friends do not talk about, I am better than you. I am more privileged than you. And so I see this as a way of then addressing these other theological questions on the basis of friendship. And you know, what I became clear to me, and this was at Jogja, when I was teaching there for the second time I visited, what I was suggesting was really, I think, what is contained in the Quran. In Surah 5, I think the verse 48, and this is the translation I have of that. It says, if Allah willed, He would have made you one nation, but He created you many in order that He may test you in what He has given you. So strive in good deeds. Compete in good deeds. The return of you all to Allah, then He will inform you about that in which you used to differ. Then He will inform you about that in which you used to differ. In other words, out of your acting together good deeds, in trying to promote human well-being, environmental well-being, in trying to promote peace with justice, you will then come to understand the things which make you different. Theology will follow from action. Theology will follow from ethics. That was the second point. The third issue has to do with my own personal interreligious dialogue, the dialogue that has become, for me, the most engaging interreligious dialogue, and that is the dialogue with Buddhism. I talked about this a little already when I was with you back in 2002, but since then, my dialogue with Buddhism has deepened. In fact, in 2008, my wife Kathy, and I took the Triple Refuge. In other words, we became Buddhists. We joined a Sangha. We had a teacher. So I am both, I like to say humbly, I hope, I am both a Buddhist and a Christian. I am what they call today a double belonger, a double practitioner. And in that book that Assis mentioned, Without Buddha, I Could Not Be a Christian. That's a title that's a little bit provocative, but I mean it. Buddhism has helped me preserve and maintain my Christian faith, has helped me understand my Christian faith more deeply. But in that dialogue, in that book, I tried to trace out what I have learned from Buddhism. But today, I want to limit myself just to talking about what I have learned from Buddhism regarding social action. What I have learned from Buddhism in our joint effort to try to promote peace with justice, to try to transform the oppressive structures of our economy and of many of our cultures. And if I could summarize in one sentence what I have learned from Buddhism about engaging and working for social justice, for peace with justice, it would be in the one simple two sentences that Thich Nhat Hanh. I imagine many of you know Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Zen Buddhist teacher. He said, and he said it to Christians in his little book, I think in his little book also on Living Buddha, Living Christ. But he says, if you want to make peace, you have to be peace. If you want to make peace, you have to be peace. And I think that sentence really summarizes for me what Buddhism challenges Christians, and I think Muslims as well. What does that mean? I think I could summarize it or explain it. It means that in order to bring about social change, in order to bring about social transformation, we first have to be transformed personally and interiorly. There has to be a personal transformation that will guide us, that will support us in our efforts, in our actions for social and political and economic transformation. Again, why? To explain that, I don't think I can explain it clearly, and maybe we can talk about this later. But what that means is that if we want to be successful social activists, if we want to promote liberation, social and economic liberation, we have to be also committed to some kind of a spiritual practice, some kind of, dare I say, some kind of a contemplative practice. And it will be different in each of our traditions. Islam has its own contemplative tradition. Christianity has its contemplative or mystical tradition. I'm talking about the Sufis tradition especially. But some kind of a practice by which we can overcome our egos, our self-centeredness, and realize, start to experience our connectedness with the divine, with God, with Allah, our oneness with God, with Allah, our identity in the divine. I'm talking here about some kind of a mystical experience. And I use that word cautiously, but I think a mystical, an internal experience by which we start to feel, yes, feel, become aware of the presence, the energy of the divine within our very beings. And it's an experience that by which we realize that our identity, who we are, is not to be found just in ourselves, but our identity is to be found in living the life of Allah. And that means living the compassion of Allah, of God, for all beings, for everyone. And we feel, in a sense, I'm talking about an experience by which we feel energized. And we start to feel in our own lives that the center of our lives moves from just a focus on ourselves. From self-centeredness, we start to live a life with Allah's help of other-centeredness. That kind of experience, that's what Thich Nhat Hanh means by being peace. By being peace, experiencing the peace of God, of Allah, of God in ourselves and our connectedness with others. And this means, therefore, and this I would like to hear your opinions about, but that in our work to try to change society and to try to overcome the structures of oppression that exist in our societies, that exist geopolitically, we have to give a certain priority to contemplation over action. In order to be activists, we first have to be, or begin to be, contemplatives. Now that doesn't mean, oh, first I have to go and do all my meditation and all my prayer, and only then can I become engaged in social action. No. But I mean that we cannot be going about our social action unless we are also given to some kind of a spiritual practice by which we start to realize that God is working with us and through us and in us. That seems to me what I have learned from Buddhism. The necessity, the priority of contemplation with action. But secondly, what I have also learned, and this was the harder part, but I've also learned from Buddhism, is that compassion has a certain priority over justice. Now this gets complex, and so just as contemplation is necessary to achieve successful social action, so compassion is necessary to achieve justice. And what does that mean? And this was embodied for me when Thich Nhat Hanh challenged me in his writings, when he said, you, Paul, are a Christian theologian, and you said that there is a preferential option for the oppressed, for the poor. And Thich Nhat Hanh said, no, God does not have preferences. God loves everyone equally. That means that God loves the oppressors just as much as God loves the oppressed. And therefore, when you go out to challenged oppression, when you go out as a Christian or as a Muslim to challenge oppressors, that challenge has to come primarily from your compassion from your love for the oppressors, not just for your love for the oppressed. Your love for the wealthy who may be oppressors, just as much as your love for the poor who are oppressed. And only then, if you can confront your oppressors with this kind of compassion, do you have any hope of changing their hearts and of truly changing the structures of oppression that are so evident in our world today. This is, for me, has been a hard lesson. And I have struggled with it, but I believe it is right. And I think this is nothing new. I think this is what we see in Mahatma Gandhi. In Mahatma Gandhi, this is his program of nonviolence, of loving the British oppressors just as much as he loved all people. And then he could confront them. And he did confront them, but it was a confrontation that came out of compassion. And for us Christians, what the Buddhists are reminding me as a Christian of is what Jesus said. Love your enemies. When they do evil to you, respond to them with good. Love them. Confront them, but love them. So this is the second lesson that I think I've learned from, I'm trying to learn. Not that I have learned it, I'm trying to learn, namely that justice is not possible without compassion, and that truly effective action is not possible without contemplation. And finally, the last point I wanted to raise, and I can do this very briefly since I see that I have talked already for 30 minutes, is the most recent research that I have done has been further investigation of the relationship between racial or white supremacy and Christian supremacy. This has been based on some research done by a friend of mine at Fordham University, a theologian by the name of Janine Hill Fletcher. Janine, she has written a book called The Sin of White Supremacy. The Sin of White Supremacy, subtitle Christianity, Diversity, and Racism in America. And in this book, she shows through historical research and historical analysis how much white supremacy, the claims of white Europeans to be superior over other races, primarily African races and the Native American races of the United States, of what is now North America, how much their conviction of having the one true religion, the superior religion, grounded their claims of being the superior race, and therefore how Christian supremacy, belief in Christianity as the one true religion, was a foundation for slavery of African Americans throughout our history. It founded slavery, and it founded the exploitation of the native peoples of America, the Native Americans, when we white people stole their land and still own their land. that religion was an integral part, Christianity was an integral part of how racism and exploitation, slavery, was founded on Christian supremacy. And that for me is just another reason why religions today are called upon, all religions are called upon to recognize their own claims of being better than all others. And every religion does it in some way or another. Maybe with the exception of indigenous religions, they don't. But how all religions are called upon to move beyond their claims of superiority towards what I would call a truly pluralistic understanding of religious diversity, that we all are unique. We all have our differences. We all can learn from each other, but no religion can claim to be a superior religion over all others. That remains the challenge. And the best way we can take up that challenge, as I said, is working together, becoming friends through shared action for human and environmental well-being. Well, Assis, and I've tried to keep myself within my time frame, and I'm very eager now to not just questions and answers, but a real conversation among ourselves, but especially our conversation within the context of the coronavirus that we're all facing now. How we religions from various parts of the world can collaborate and work together, help each other to address the suffering due to the pandemic. So thank you very much for your attention. I really appreciate this opportunity to be with you again. It warms my 81-year-old heart to be with you again. And I look forward now to a conversation.
Thank you so much, Professor Niter, for your heartwarming presentation. And I believe there are so many insightful points that Professor Niter presented earlier. For example, about doing good deeds as the foundation for interreligious dialogue, and also compassion over justice. And there are many other things. It's just my take. And if you want to listen again the presentation by Professor Niter, you can watch later the recording of this meeting on our YouTube channel, CRCS Weekend. But before we have discussion and conversation, I'd like to show a photo when Professor Niter was teaching at CRCS. So it's in the website, the CRCS website.
Oh my!
Let me hide the video meeting panel. So you see here, so you can go to our website, the announcement for this event, and you scroll down and you can find one photo when Professor Niter was teaching CRCS students.
With a beard.
Yeah. And you can see, because I was student of CRCS in 2014, I know almost none among the students, except for one figure here, Pak Zainal Abidin Bakir. At that time was still young. Yeah, this Pak Zain is still young. Now is young, but not so young as in the past. This was in the 406 room. Yes. And there are also other photos that you can also see later. So for those of you who ask about the papers that Professor Niter was talking about and was sending to us, I will upload the papers beneath this photo later, at the latest until tomorrow morning. Hope that you can find them and download it for free tomorrow. All right. Now let's have discussion, and you can do it three ways. You can ask your questions through the chat room, or you can raise your hands virtually, or you can write down your questions via YouTube comments, and Mas Anchu will read it out for us. So please raise your hands. And all right, I will start with
Muhammad Nizar.
Muhammad. Yeah. Muhammad Nizar.
Yes, thank you. Let me introduce myself, Professor Paul Nizar. My name is Muhammad Nizar. I'm a student at graduate school doctoral program in Sunan Kalijaga, Yogyakarta, Islamic Studies. Actually, my master in Hadis wa Ulumu, Ilmu Hadis, Science of Hadis. I have a question for you. In best story, the long story, when the Islam came, the first came, there is a perasaan, ada sebuah perasaan, ya, yes, perasaan baru, bahwasanya agama ini, this new religion will describe mengganggu agama lain, the Christianity. Like the king of Kisra, Persia, Romawi, follow Muhammad and just be his followers, new followers, and say Shahada. And the story become until now in modern, in millennial era. So what's your opinion about Muslim millennial, Christian millennial, about the communication in medsos, like Twitter, like Facebook, like Instagram, in communication based keharmonisan, begitu Pak Aziz, tentang keharmonisan, saling mencela, kadang tidak mencela, kadang membela, itu bagaimana? About your opinion in interfight, about young interfight in medsos, the communication, Professor. I think that's all my question.
I will translate the questions.
Sorry.
Muhammad Nizar is a doctoral student at Sunan Kalijaga Islamic University, just near Gajah Mada and Gajah Mada University, and he asked about how do we read the histories of religion where there are invitation to follow someone's religion because someone believes that his or her religion is the superior one. So for example, he come up with the example of when, in the case of the history of Islam, when Muhammad or his followers sent a letter to the king of Rome and to the king of Persia to follow the Islamic religion. And I believe that the same case also happens in other religion. I mean, it is about da'wah or missionary. How do we locate this idea of missionary within interreligious dialogue if someone doesn't really believe that his or her religion is the right religion? And another question is about, do you have any suggestions to the Muslim or Christian millennials today who are doing debates on social media about who has the upper hand in terms of truth claim, etc. Something like that.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Good. Well, and again, I will offer, some comments on your questions, Mohammed. But I also invite other people, to offer their reflections or their answers on your very important questions. On the first one, on dawah, on missionary action, on going out to proclaim, as Muhammad did, as Jesus did, because they were prophets. They were convinced that God had revealed something to them, that they had learned something that was important for everyone, not just for themselves. and not just for their tribe, not just for their own people. So I would, Muhammad, I would make a distinction between proposing, coming to you. Okay, let's say I come to you, Muhammad, and I believe that I have something that you need to learn. Now that doesn't mean, I want to make a distinction between something that is universally for everyone important, maybe universally essential. That is one thing. And the other is that it is superior over you or exclusive of yours. There's a difference between universally essential and superior. So I think that I have something to tell you that you need to learn. And I do that in a way in which I show my humility. I try to express my humility and my compassion for you, but I really want you to learn this. I really want you to agree with me. But because it is not exclusive of other truth, because it is not necessarily superior to other truth, that means, Muhammad, that after I tell you what I think you need to learn from me, I then say, now, do you have anything that you feel I need to learn from you? So this is missionary work. This is missionary activity in which the missionary or the witness goes out not only to teach, but also to learn. And I think that is what Muslim and Christian missionaries are to do today, to go out and to witness to what I have learned from Jesus, for you to witness what you have learned from Muhammad in the Quran, but also to be ready, open, eager to be witnessed to receive, possibly to learn something that you did not learn before about God. That would be the first issue. So I still affirm missionary work, but it is missionary work that understood more widely than earlier, where both sides, the missionary has something to teach, but the missionary has something to learn. And as far as using all the social media for the millennials, as you said, your second question, I just see this now, all of these social means of social media and communication to be both a tremendous blessing and opportunity, but also a tremendous danger. An opportunity, but also a danger. I mean, we have the opportunity to connect over distances. You know this much better than I. But there's also the social media become a way in which anybody can say whatever they want without any kind of interpersonal connections, where I can talk to you before I get to know you, and I can be before we can become friends. And when that happens, people can be very rude and very exclusive and very, very nasty to each other. So I'm just saying something that I think is pretty evident. I don't have anything profound to say about your second question. But anyway, I don't know if that makes any sense to you, Mohammed, and to others. Mm-hmm.
Okay, now there are 6 people in the queue to ask questions. I will go first with which one? Pak Iqbal. Pak Iqbal, where are you? Pak Iqbal. Let me unmute you first. I didn't find you. Or perhaps we can start with Mbak Sarah. Mbak Sarah from Emory University, also CRCS alumni.
Hello,
Sarah?
Papa and everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah. I was with you during the earthquake in Jogja.
Ah, Sarah, yes.
Yes, I'm the
Oh, it's so good to see you.
yes, and Dr. Christine Gudorf students too. I actually just recently finished my doctoral study at Emory, and now I'm a postdoctoral research fellow there.
Oh, congratulations. It's so good to see you and hear you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I have a questions about what you said about compassion to the oppressor. So I have been teaching at Emory, especially in theology school. So most of my students are priests or, future priests or future leaders
Minister.
in the church. And, like with what's going on in the US, there's like a lot of cultural complacency with structural injustice. And, my student of color certainly have kind of like compassion fatigue, and sometimes when I have to facilitate discussions about racial disparities or racial injustice, or even, I know that maybe you also following what's going on in Methodist Church, with
Yeah.
LGBT students. I mean, I can feel like, okay, maybe I have to, I try to, of course, cover both sides, in the discussions, but it is very hard to not give space and more space to the students that actually directly affected by this structural violence, really. And I even like give them space because I think in the pedagogy, like now, there even like some people advocate on, the oppressed or people who's like still hurt doesn't need to explain themselves. They don't need to explain their pain to educate others because they need to heal themselves. So what I mean is like the situation in the classroom can be awkward, right? Because people who don't feel affected, they kind of like try to be so careful in giving their contributions, and people who are victimized by the current social structure, they sometimes, I feel like now they will say things, but they also feel tired to explain and educate others on how deep their pain is. So I kind of like want to ask you like how to deal with this, how to deal with students and maybe ourselves when we have this compassion fatigue. Because of course we try to be contemplative, but we need to, how do you call it? Sometimes I think like, I don't know, I feel like it is good to have kind of like more structures, expression of anger maybe, or something, because it needs to be acknowledged. Yeah, I just want to know what you think about it. Thank you.
Yeah, well, Sarah, that is a very a complex issue, no doubt. And on the one hand, you talk about compassion fatigue, Sarah, and Aziz, can you please unmute Sarah, because I just want to ask her a further question. Sarah, when you talk about compassion fatigue, are you talking about the victims of injustice? That they are just tired of being compassionate to their oppressors. I just didn't quite understand who had the compassion fatigue.
Yeah, I think it can be the victim, and it can be also social justice activists, because it seems that we're trying to explain and give so much attention to educate the oppressor or people who still ignorant. But in the long term, it can be so taxing, right? Emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's very interesting that you bring up the term compassion fatigue, because that is something that just recently in the Buddhist practice that my wife and I follow, our teacher has really talked much about the need to recognize compassion fatigue. And what is that? What we're talking about, where it's especially people who are trying to address suffering, and suffering due to exploitation or racism, that they just get tired. They run out. It becomes so oppressive. They run out of just the energy to respond. And again, two things. in addressing compassion fatigue that our Buddhist teacher stresses. And the one thing is that to really welcome, be mindful of, and to welcome these feelings. I mean, these are feelings of exhaustion, feelings of perhaps of depression or of fear. Recognize the feelings. Don't run away from them. I mean, and as much as you can, be with them. But then, and this is, I hope this is not too, I hope this is understandable, but then, and this is where contemplation and practice comes in, and then let your feelings, these feelings of fear or of anger or of exhaustion, let those feelings be held. I use that, let them be held in this larger compassion, which is for us Muslims and Christians, the compassion of God, of Allah. Know that your feelings are real. Your feelings are there. Don't run away from them. But after you recognize them, or as part of recognizing them, turn them over. Let them be held in the compassion of Allah. In other words, this is coming back to, in our efforts to deal with injustice and racism, the importance of some kind of a contemplative practice. But another point, if I understood your question correctly, is that while we have to, and I'm going to speak as someone in the privileged, I'm talking now as a white Christian male. In other words, the dominant power in at least in the United States. But that while it is necessary, to have compassion also for oppressors, that does not mean, while we have to have equal compassion for oppressors and oppressed, that does not mean that the oppressed and oppressors have equal time to speak. To me, it seems to me that people who have been marginalized and put aside, when they come together with others to try to solve their problems with the oppressors, they have to speak first. They have the privilege of speaking first because they represent an experience and a reality that people like me cannot fully understand. We, people in positions of power, first have to listen before they speak. Sarah, I feel very inadequate in trying to answer your question, and I ask you, does this make any sense to you, or can you clarify your own questions in the light of what I just said?
Yeah, I think you help, especially like to train people, right? And that's what I'm trying to also train my students to listen and even respond, at least in acknowledgement when they don't have solutions yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you brought important point that when it is becoming unbearable, we have to connect our compassion or give back our frustration to God. That's, I think, the privilege of people who have faith, right? To kind of connect it to the greater compassions. And I want to add a little bit, I think I mentioned before, but sometimes I think, and this is what people, some other teachers advocate, even though we want to give space for the oppressed to speak first, we also should give them space if they don't want to speak anymore.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But just to add one thing to that, while it is so important for people of faith, to be able to let their own feelings, their own negative feelings be held in God's love, we have to be careful of not to do that too quickly. They talk about the danger of spiritual bypass. In other words, you turn to God too quickly before actually recognizing, feeling your feelings of either depression or of anger. It is so important to feel anger, to really recognize anger, and to accept the fact that you are very angry or that you are very, very discouraged. But in other words, this is very important psychologically, I think, that we don't use religion to run away from our feelings, that we genuinely have to enter into and accept our feelings. And then after we have really entered into and welcomed our feelings and saying, I am just exhausted, or I am so angry at you for what you have done, recognize then and only then can we then open it and let it be held in God's love and sustained by God. I think that's, at least for me, that's very important. I have used religion to run away from my feelings for many, many years of my life. And I see the danger of doing that.
Okay, there are 6 people in the queue. Professor Nita, is it okay if you answer 3 questions at once? I mean, 3 people
okay.
at once.
I'll try to do that, sure.
So to make more, I believe, a bit efficient. So I will go with first Septemi Lakawa and then later Pak Suhadi. And Pak Iqbal, do you still want to ask questions? Okay, Septemi Lakawa first.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Niter. I'm not an alumna of CRCS. I'm Septemi Lakawa from Jakarta Theological Seminary. You visited us several years ago, many years ago, when I was still a student.
Oh, is
I'm
that
sure
right?
you don't remember me. Thank you for this opportunity. I followed your presentation and I'm so appreciative of this opportunity, especially your second remark about the source of social justice, that is compassion, impartial love to both oppressed and the oppressors. I saw that Sarah has problematized it, and I second her opinion. My question is much more on the reflective side. What is your hope or vision for interreligious dialogue, say in the next 50 years? Me asking this question from within the context of the pandemic. Many of us, I think, in this platform tonight, at least have at least one or 2 ways of understanding what is interreligious dialogue or what interreligious dialogue is supposed to be. But I think the pandemic has also unveiled the structure or the long embedded structure of injustice and how the pandemic affected all of us globally differently at different levels. So me asking you, what is your vision about interreligious dialogue in the next 50 years based on this global situation that we are facing? I think I'm addressing the question of a new normal. Do you think that we need a new normal of interreligious dialogue in the aftermath of the pandemic? Because we have seen, at least I have seen, the loss of empathy, the loss of compassion that has been claimed as the core of religions. So if everybody now globally said we need a new normal, what would be a new normal for interreligious dialogue if there will be an aftermath for this pandemic? Thank you again.
All right, now Pak Suhadi. Pak Suhadi.
Thank you, Aziz, for giving me a room for this question to Professor Paul Niter. I'm Suhadi, Prof. Paul Niter. I was student at CRCS. I joined the workshops where you are there with you were there with other friends. I have short questions. We assume in general that that all people are all people profess religion, but in fact, the number of people believe in religion is decreasing in some part of the world. After this pandemic, also many people maybe worry about whether they still need to believe in God or not, etc. So my question is in relation with philosophical basis of dialogue among those believer and those non-believers. Is there what is specific spatial characters of the philosophical basis of dialogue between those believer and non-believers? Thank you.
Okay, one more.
So how did,
Actually, there are a lot here in the chat, and I'm going to, how many? I'm going to pick one first. This question from Fahru Razi, CRCS alumni, again. Professor Paul, according to my experience, there are some people who refuse to talk about interreligious dialogue because they said that we don't need it. We don't need to talk about religious issues. Perhaps if I can paraphrase this question is that, is it necessary? Why is it necessary to have interreligious dialogue during this crisis? Thank you.
So that excuse me, that is the question from not from you, but from whom?
Fahru Razi. Razi.
Yeah. Razi. Okay. Yes. Well, why these are all very, very important questions and very difficult questions too. But the first one from, do I have the name Septemi Lakawa?
Yeah.
Excuse my mispronunciation. What is the new normal for dialogue? I really think that is crucial, and I think again the pandemic. What you said is so true, and so many more. This being recognized again and again. The pandemic has revealed, has drawn the curtain back on the incredible inequalities that still characterize the world, and certainly in the United States. The inequalities between the very wealthy and who have control power and the vast majority, the 1% and the 99%. And we see, for instance, the people in the United States who primarily are victims of the virus are people in the so-called the poorer levels of society, and that means basically Black and brown people. We see this, and I think in terms of what the pandemic has revealed is precisely the reality that is becoming clearer to many representatives of religions. Certainly not to all, I don't mean that at all, but there are significant numbers of people in the religions of the world and significant numbers of religious leaders. And I'm happy to say that I, as a Catholic Christian, now have a Pope, Pope Francis, who is also saying to the religions of the world and calling for what you would call, Septemi, a new normal. Now, enough with all of our theological bickerings about who is better than the other. The reality of the world, Pope Francis has held up the environmental threat, but now we see that the injustice that the pandemic has revealed. It is now time, finally, I don't know if I should say finally, but now is the time for the religions to put aside their theological differences and cooperate, collaborate, work together, show that religion can make a difference in the social, the economic well-being of people and the medical well-being of people today. Now, whether there will be a new normal or whether things will just go back to what it was before, both politically and economically, who can tell? But now we do have an opportunity, I think, for a new kind of interfaith collaboration, as well as a new kind of international collaboration. I speak as an idealist. I speak as an idealist, but I speak as a Buddhist here. And so, Septimi, when you say, what is your hope for a new kind of interreligious dialogue? My Buddhist teacher tells me, don't hope, give up hope. You're clinging to hope. Your actions should not depend upon what you hope for. Your actions should depend upon what is right, what you feel called to do, what God is now prompting you to do, whatever the future. I don't care, just act, because this is now what God is calling us to do, what the world is calling us to do, and abandon all hope. You know, that's very close. No, it's basically the same thing of what the Bhagavad Gita in Hinduism calls us to do. Act without seeking the fruit of your action. Act without seeking the fruit of your action. Act without hoping that you will have success. Act, and let your actions be motivated by Krishna, or by Allah, or by God, or by the Spirit. Let that be the foundation for your action. And what will happen? What fruit will come? That is not for you to know. So the second question from Suhadi, what about those who are not religious? If I'm tuning into your question, I feel that the kind of inter-religious dialogue that I and others, and it's not just I, certainly many others, are calling for, namely a interreligious collaboration of action, of engagement to address the sufferings of the world. This is a dialogue that is not at all, by its very nature, limited to people who have religious faith. In fact, I think, and I have found, that this is the kind of a dialogue of an interreligious dialogue that can appeal to people who are not religious. Namely, we are calling on all people to come to collaborate in trying to address the sufferings of this world. We act together, and then we come together to reflect. We act together and we come together to reflect. Reflection, conversation follows our action. And for that conversation, I would welcome, and I think anybody, whether you are religious or not, as long as you feel committed and called to address the sufferings of this world. I must just add here how this can work. My brother, who is now deceased for about 10 years, but my brother was an atheist, a hardcore atheist. And he used to say, you are wasting your time about what all you're studying theology, this, and he says, religion is much more of a problem than it is a solution. But when when I sent him a particular book on One Earth, Many Religions, which called for the religions to collaborate on this kind of a ethical dialogue addressing suffering and injustice, that's when he said, Paul, finally, I can agree and be with you. I don't believe in God, but I believe in humanity and human beings' connectedness and human beings' obligation to help each other. So I think, again, I'm not sure this is getting at the intent of your question, but for most of the people who are not religious, who have abandoned religion, much of it, the reason they have is because they have seen what religion has done and how it has fostered animosity and superiority and violence. But when they see that religions are coming together for this kind of a collaboration, I think it can make all of the difference. And that would get to the third question of the many people who say we don't need interreligious dialogue. I guess I would answer in two ways. First of all, what kind of dialogue do you say is not necessary? If it's going to be a dialogue about, life after death, about the nature of the human soul, about how creation came about, yeah, maybe that dialogue is not that important. I like that kind of dialogue, though. That's theological dialogue. I want to get to that. But that's not what is most urgent. I mean, what is most urgent is this collaboration. I think this kind of dialogue, can make a difference. And I believe that that's the kind of dialogue that such people who disparage dialogue maybe can make them think twice. But secondly, if you want to engage all people in addressing the environmental threat, the environmental crisis that we're all facing, if you want to get people involved in doing something about it, then darn it, you have to recognize that, I don't know what the percentage is, but that there are large portions of human beings today are religious. They believe in some greater reality that is, and if you want to engage those people in the important task of addressing social injustice or environmental degradation or the effects of the coronavirus, if you want to engage as many people as possible, well, my friend, you're going to have to engage them as religious people. And you have to recognize that they, as religious people, can be engaged. If you want to say all of the religious people of the world, I don't want to talk to, you are cutting yourself off from great opportunities. So whether that makes sense or not. If there might be any follow-up questions, fine. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's perfectly makes sense. And now I will go to Maraike Bangun. Maraike Bangun. I will unmute you.
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Maraike. I'm an alumni of Jakarta Theological Seminary. And yes, and right now I'm a doctoral student at the University of Hamburg in Germany.
Oh, you're in Hamburg right now, Marika? Oh, yes, good. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Thank you also for the host to conduct this meeting. I would like to ask about social transformation and its connection to superior truth claim. You mentioned that to bring about social transformation, we have to be personally transformed first. And in this idea, I have some fears. First, we may falsely believe that we are transformed, and yet we haven't actually reached that transformation. And this may lead to another superior claim of truth because we believe and feel that we have been transformed. We have to transform the world. So how to help us not to fall into another superior truth of claim in this sense? And yeah, that is my main question. Thank you.
Certainly. Good.
Thank you, Mbak Maraike. Now I will read one question from the chat, and because there are a lot of them, so I have no other option but to pick one. I will pick one from Pak Iqbal Ahnaf. who is also CRCS student of the same batch as Anju, Mas Anju. Pak Iqbal Ahnaf is now a lecturer at CRCS. He says, I found cases where positive interreligious engagement is possible among those with supremacist theology.
I'm sorry, say that again, please.
I found cases where positive interreligious engagement is possible among those with supremacist theology. So Professor Paul, you may remember in the post-earthquake in Jogja, there were collaborations between churches and militant Muslim groups in disaster recovery. Often what I found is the level of trust and shared experience that made dialogue possible than theology. Oh, he's not asking questions, he just commented.
No, but it's good, yeah.
Yeah, it is so nice to see you look healthy, Professor Paul.
Thank you.
Yeah, now, are there questions from YouTube, Mas Anju?
Yes,
Anju?
yes.
Yeah, would you read one?
There are 3 questions. There are 3.
Just one. Pick one.
Some of them are related. Some of them are related to what you have said about the theology. Religion has been problematic when it connects to politics. So even during the pandemic, some religious followers have also refused the government's policy, and that's kind of like a theological supremacy. And that is from Yusuf Anamufa. And the other one, which is also related, is that for the theological judgments for the pandemic cases, for example, that in holy texts, both the Quran and the Bible have some verses that say that that kind of pandemic virus are God's judgment or punishments. And how would you see that as the how would you see that as a challenge for interreligious dialogue? So the last one is very simple.
Yeah, very simple, yes.
Yeah, the second one was from Papua, from Christian University of Sentani. The third one is from Bandri, also from Catholic University in Kalimantan. So he is basically trying to understand the difference between religious and faith. For him, not all religious. I mean, being religious is not always faithful, but being faithful is always religious.
So being religious
is not always faithful, but being faithful is always religious, and that is peace. That is the foundation of peace. And do you have any opinion on that? So that's what we have from YouTube. There are some watchers too in YouTube who couldn't come into the Zoom. All right, Mas Aziz, come to you.
Yeah. All right, you can answer now, Professor.
Oh, yeah, sure, I can answer. I wish I could answer. Well, no, but again, thank you very much. The first one from Mareka, boy, that's a really important observation, namely that in calling for personal transformation, it has happened that people who think they are transformed, people who think they now are in touch with God, they know more about God than anyone else. In other words, exactly what you said, Marika, it gives them a sense of being superior. Oh, I have a spiritual practice. I meditate. You don't. Therefore, I am closer to God than you. An absolute dangerous possibility. This is why I think efforts, what I talked about spiritual practices, what I talked about contemplative contemplative exercises like meditation, why it is so important to do those with others, not just by yourself, to do it in some kind of a community of other people who are sharing your practice. And if possible, really, and make the possibility possible to have a teacher, to have a spiritual director, so that you're not going about your work for transformation all by yourself, because the dangers are there. They're exactly what you said, Marika. And you need a teacher, you need others. As I mean, one of my best other practitioners is my wife, who can keep me very humble. when I think I know things, when I start, she knows me better than anyone else. But anyway, that you have other people with whom you can say, this is what I have experienced. What do you think? Who can challenge you? Other people who can keep you humble, because humility is a sign of spiritual transformation. What you know when you begin to experience God, or the reality of the divine presence, when you start to experience that, you know that there is so much that you do not know. What you know tells you that there is so much more that you don't know, and that keeps you humble. But you need others to help you maintain that humility. The second point, that's a good one too, and it goes back to the to the earthquake, and namely people who make claims of religious supremacy can engage in dialogue. But if I understood, was it Faisal? If I understood what you said, I would just say, what kind of dialogue are the supremacists engaging in? They're not engaging in what we would call theological dialogue. That, my experience with fundamentalists, if I may use that word, or supremacists, they don't want to engage in theological dialogue because they don't have anything to learn. But exactly the needs, the suffering that arose during the earthquake, or just, I know I have in New York, we worked with Orthodox Hasidic Jews who didn't want to have anything to do with other religions, but who recognized that there were problems in the community in which some kids were ganging up on other children in the community, and they needed to talk with other people, with Christians and Muslims, about how their children were being attacked by. Then they wanted to collaborate, and they did, and we did. But then what happened is we became friends. You know, we liked each other. The Hasidic Jews realized that these Christians and these Muslims are really nice people, you know? And so again, there was a step made. It did not happen then, I'm not claiming that, but we created an environment where eventually there was the possibility that we could actually then start talking about what are some of our theological or religious differences. But clearly, supremacists can engage in an ethical dialogue, but I don't know if they can, you can tell me, correct me please, but I don't think they can engage in what we would call religious or theological dialogue. The third set of questions, you know, the first reality, and we have had this in the United States where there have been churches who do not follow the instructions of the government, namely social distancing. You cannot gather in church during the time of the virus. And they said, no, it's God's will, we have to do this. I have to be careful here. I tend to lose patience with that. I would appeal to them. I don't know what you can do about that, except to say, as a Christian or as a Muslim, you are called to love your neighbor. You are called to care for the well-being of your neighbor. And this is why you are being asked not to gather physically together, because there is a danger that you will harm your neighbor. Please listen to that. And if they said, oh, God will protect us, then that leads us to the other question of people who look upon the pandemic as an act of God, as punishment from God. Just like the other religion, the other community, Christian communities say, oh, we can gather and God will protect us. You know, there is where I just have to, as carefully, as gently, as humbly, but as clearly as I can say, let us talk about, let me tell you what is my understanding of how God is with us. And this would get us into a theological conversation, but let me just say, I'll just give you my own understanding of my own theology of God is that God is a punishing God who intervenes into history and creates things like the pandemic in order to punish people, or who intervenes into history and says, I'm going to protect these people from the pandemic and I'm not going to protect those people. I want to say this very carefully, but such a God, I can't believe him. That offends my intellect, that offends my rationality, which is a gift of God. God asked me to think. And I think, and here is where Islam and at least Catholic Christianity are very similar, if not the same. But that, if I understand, and please, I shouldn't speak for Islam, you are the expert, but I think for all of us, at least for certain strands of Islam, that what God reveals, what we believe is God's truth, does not contradict our understanding. And it may be beyond our understanding. The truth that God is beyond more than we comprehend. It is beyond our reason, but it is not contrary to our reason. And when it is contrary to our reason, then I think we are perhaps misunderstanding the Quran or the Bible. And then finally, for the last question, I love that statement. Being religious is not always faithful, but being faithful is always religious. And this is where there is a distinction between faith and religion, or faith and belief. Faith is what I called earlier the personal experience of God. The personal experience that there is a divine reality that surrounds me, that holds me, that is at the ground of my being, that is always with me. That is faith, and that is a gift. Belief and religion is what I do in order to express that faith, in order to express that experience with others. Our beliefs, our practices, very essential. But faith is not religion. I think religion is very important, if not necessary, to maintain faith. But once we confuse religion with faith, then religion becomes an idol. Then we slip into idolatry, and we make an idol out of our religion, or we make an idol out of the Bible, or we make an idol out of the Quran. and that I think is a great danger, and one of the reasons why religion is looked upon so negatively by many people. But I see, are we beyond our time? I don't, I think we may be, but anyway, that would be my attempt to comment on those questions.
Thank you, Professor Niter. And usually when we do this offline, we hold this event up until 1.5 hours. It's now already 1.5 hours. So I think, and there are still many questions in the chat, and there are still 76 people here in the Zoom meeting. Perhaps I think for the last comments, and I would like to summarize some of the questions that I think are similar. They ask, what are the prospects for interreligious dialogue after this pandemic? Are you optimistic that religious people would be more inclusive later after this pandemic, or they will go back as usual in the past? They will start fighting again after this COVID-19 crisis ends. Yeah, I think that can be your final statement or your last comment for this forum.
Yes, I really do think that the pandemic, like the environmental crisis that we are facing, the pandemic is a temporary crisis, and the environmental reality is an ongoing crisis. But I think it is crises like this when we see two things. We see the horrible situation that we are in terms of suffering. And when we see how religion in the past has been, perhaps often, all too often, religion has been a contribution to some of these sufferings. We talked about some of them just now with some of what for me are not good religious beliefs that justify the pandemic as God's punishment. But the fact that there is so much inequality, so much suffering due to inequality, that's because the pandemic has made that clear, that there is ongoing the threat that we are going to destroy the life-giving capacities of this earth. This is I think, and I'll end with this is my hope. This is my hope, but I don't cling to my hope. I'm a good Buddhist. I have hope, but I don't cling to it. But I think that the religions of the world, in a sense, are entering a new, if I may put it this way, a new axial period. You talk about the axial period in the history of religions, that happened around from 200 before the Common Era to about 600 after the Common Era, when there was a transformation in religious consciousness. This was, I'm sure you may have come across this, the axial period of religious history. Well, I think we're entering a new axial period. We have the possibility to enter a new axial period where religions are going to feel the challenge of coming together to act together and learn from each other. And in other words, to set aside their claims of my God is bigger than your God, or I have more truth than you, set those aside and recognize that religion faces a challenge today that perhaps it did not have to face, could not face earlier, namely to cooperate, to call the millions of people who are religious together to work together for the well-being of humanity and the well-being, as the Buddhists would put it, the well-being of all sentient beings. And I don't know if that will come about, but even though I'm 81 years old, I'm going to still keep at it and try to make that possible. And I am so profoundly appreciative and profoundly grateful that all of you have given me reason to carry on with that optimism. To see so many young faces carrying on with this work of living our religious faith living our religious convictions together. And I thank you for it.
Thank you so much, Professor Paul Niter, for all your wonderful presentation and your heartwarming, insightful points that you have made. And for people, whenever you are, you can do clapping now if you want. Give applause to Professor Paul Niter.
Thank you.
We at CRCS are really grateful. We are really fortunate to have you tonight here in Jogja, afternoon there perhaps in the US. And we really hope that we can still strengthen this connection between CRCS, HRS, and theologians in the US. And we hope that we can still have chances in the future that we can meet again, or to have another talk or forum where we are meeting with you. And
Very
so, because I believe that this event cannot last forever, then I'm going to end the live stream on YouTube, and then for some of you, especially CRCS alumni who have memories with Professor Paul Niter, you can have informal conversation later, but I want to formally end first this event.
Mas Ajis,
And
Mas
I am so
you invite Pak Zainal just there.
Pak Zainal, are you there? Where is it?
Is he?
Oh yeah,
Is it-
yeah.
Where is it now?
Zainal.
I would love to
Zainal.
see him.
Pak Zainal.
Yeah.
I already
Oh, there you are. Okay.
Hello.
Good to see you.
Hello, Prof.
You look even younger than you were when I.
That's not true.
But you also look wiser. You are wise like I am.
The sign of wise.
Listen, I am so sorry, but I have another Zoom meeting scheduled now that I have to go to, so I cannot stay on longer.